Today we will be building medieval houses using just cardboards and ice cream sticks. Quick, easy and cheap. What are you waiting for? Get your tools ready because we're starting. Let's start by printing and cutting the house templates. I will leave mine in the description so you can use them. However, I have built several houses and in some of them I combined several together or even cut some smaller ones. By making different combinations and modifications, you can create a good variety of houses. Once cut out, we will use them on a piece of thick corrugated cardboard to mark the cuts we need to make. I recommend doing this in batches, planning in advance how many houses you will need to assemble a village. Once we finish, we will use a knife and a roller to make all the cuts, and we will organize the pieces according to the house they belong to. It's time to assemble the structure. I'm going to use hot glue since I want it to dry quickly. Although it's not 100% necessary, I want to use a square roller to make sure the angles between the pieces are 90 degrees. Now we will use coffee sticks and ice cream sticks to simulate the beams and hide the edges of the cardboard, and we will glue them to the houses using hot glue. The first thing I do is create a frame at the top, which will mark the level of the roof and serve as support for the beams that hold that roof. Next, we will glue smaller beams and glue them together to the corners and along the long sides. Then, we cut more coffee sticks, but this time at an angle, for the front of the house. And finally, we will cut and glue one last vertical beam that will support the weight of the roof. You can make this process as complicated as you want, but in my case, the goal of this build was to be quick and relatively simple, so I'm already satisfied with this approach. For two-floor houses, it's also important to create a frame at the bottom of the second floor. This marks where the floor will theoretically be and leaves a much more aesthetic finish. Now it's time to build the roof. I'm going to use cardboard as a base, taking roughly measurements. We cut using scissors, fold it in half and glue it using hot glue. It's important to fill any gaps that may remain and reinforce the interior with glue, so that the whole house is strong enough. For the corner house, I simply used the large house and added the small one to the side, with just one facade. As for the roof, we made the large part as usual, making a couple of cuts to accommodate it through the walls. Then, for the other part, we will cut the cardboard using the longest side as a reference, fold it, and with the folded cardboard, make a 45 degrees cut using scissors again. Next, we will glue it with hot glue, making sure to couple the joints well. We've reached a part of the process that is fun and tedious at the same time, making the shingles. Between me and my friends, we saved a lot of cereal box cardboard, and I cut it all into small rectangles of different sizes. Very important! Cut enough shingles first, because otherwise you will have to interrupt the process, and I think it's something you have to do entering in some kind of flow, while listening to music or watching a video in the background. Remember that for each layer you glue, you should alternate the shingles. You can also put twisted ones to simulate the passage of time or a power construction. When there's hardly any space left, it's time to use longer shingles and fold them in half. I use two sizes and also alternate them so that they don't clash with the rest. For the corner house shingles, we glue the cardboard pieces as usual, and when we reach the junction point between both roofs, we simply make an angle cut in the corresponding shingle. We continue adding details. Now we're going to make some windows. I know this method I'm going to use isn't the one that looks best, but it's tremendously quick and easy. Simply cut several pieces of balsa wood. Then, with the help of a pencil, we will make a groove in the middle and add texture, trying to mimic the appearance of a shutter or a wooden window frame. Next, we will cut as many coffee sticks as windows we've made, as long as our window's width. Once everything is nicely sanded, we turn on our hot glue gun. Glue the two window parts together and then attach it to the house. I've tried to distribute them evenly so that most sides of the house have a window, but without overdoing it. Let's continue joining the two-floor houses. First, we will use jumbo ice cream sticks to close the part that will be visible once the union is made. To do this, we will cut them to size and glue them together again with hot glue. After making sure the pieces fit together, we firmly glue them with hot glue and cover any gaps from the inside. To add a bit more detail, I am going to cut some sticks and glue them so they look like beams supporting the upper floor. Now onto the doors. I've cut several strips of balsa wood, which I will glue to the facade to simulate the door frame. Then we'll glue some strips of cardboard as planks, and finally glue small bed as if it were the handle. With everything dry, we will spread PVA glue over all the remaining visible cardboard. Then we will sprinkle fine sand to give textures to the walls and let it dry overnight. You can also do this last step using putty, but I particularly like the finish that the sand gives. At this point, I have to admit that I forgot to add chimneys. It's something you can easily do with XPS foam and I might correct it at some point. But it doesn't bother me much since they work perfectly for playing, which is why I make them and I don't prioritize realism that much. That said, it's time to bring our houses to life by painting them. But before that, if you're enjoying this tutorial, hit the like button, subscribe and turn on the notifications. This helps me a lot to keep making videos. Like in all my builds, I'm going to prime with a mixture of black acrylic paint and PVA glue, to start painting from the darkest shades and also to harden the piece. For this project, I've applied 2 coats, paying special attention to the parts with sand, as it's where it's most difficult for the paint to penetrate. With the primer dry, we apply a dark shade of blue to the roofs, trying to cover most of the surface. Next, we continue with beige for the walls, painting patiently to cover well and trying not to stain the beams. Then we use brown for the wood, letting a bit of the black from the primer coat show through. With everything dry, we will start applying some dry brushing. The first will be to the wood which is painted with a lighter brown, trying to highlight the wood textures. We continue with battery color for the walls, using soft and lightly loaded brush strokes. Now for the roof, using an intermediate blue, trying to still cover quite a bit, as we still have another shade to apply, but letting both the black from the primer and the dark blue show through, creating depth and texture. We will finish the roof using light blue. This time the brush should barely contain paint, so we will dry it well on a piece of paper before painting. Remember that we can always add more paint, but if we put too much in this step, we can ruin all the work we've done with the roof. Now, for the final details, we will paint the doorknobs with silver using a fine brush. Finally, we will weather the house using ink. I've prepared a dark brown that we will apply carefully to simulate the passage of time, the watering and the dampness. The trick here is to apply the ink to the corners and joints between the beams and the walls. Additionally, to simulate dampness, I've loaded the brush quite a bit to let the ink itself slide down like a drip. Once the paint is completely dry, we can consider this construction finished.